Let me start with an uncomfortable idea. What if the part of your brain designed to keep you safe is actually the same part that's nudging you towards risk? We like to believe unsafe decisions come from carelessness, poor attitude, or a lack of training, that if perhaps people just tried harder or paid more attention, then risk would just disappear. But neuroscience tells us something far more unsettling. In many cases, people take risks not because they don't care about safety, but because their brains are doing exactly what they evolved to do. And once you understand that, safety culture starts to look very different. Because this isn't about blame, it's actually about biology. How the brain really judges risk. Because our brains are prediction machines. They're constantly scanning the environment, asking just this one core question: am I safe to proceed? Not, am I perfectly safe? Not, is this risk free? But, is this safe enough compared to last time? That distinction matters more than most organizations realize. Over time, if nothing bad happens, the brain quietly downgrades the perceived risk. The unfamiliar becomes familiar. The dangerous becomes normal. The shortcut becomes routine. And I've seen this play out countless times in real workplaces. Someone carries out a task for the first time and they've received all the warnings. They're careful and they follow the steps. They're alert. The second time, there's still a tension, but a little less tension. And by the 10th time, well, it's routine. By the 50th time, it's just how we do things. Nothing has gone wrong in that time, so the brain quietly updates its model. It thinks if this was dangerous, something would have happened by now. Now, what's interesting is that when something eventually does go wrong, the person involved is often genuinely shocked. They're not defensive, they're not careless, they're shocked. Because from the brain's point of view, they've already downgraded that risk. And that's the moment that leaders often struggle to understand. They will often say, well, why didn't they see it coming? But the better question is, why would the brain still be flagging danger when experience, that's already taught them that there wasn't any? Now, this process is called habituation. It's incredibly efficient and it's essential for functioning every day. But it does come at a bit of a cost because the brain rewards efficiency far more than caution. And there's another layer that leaders often underestimate: psychological safety. From a neurological perspective, speaking up about risk is a social gamble. The brain doesn't clearly distinguish between physical threat and social threat. Status, belonging, reputation, they're all processed using that same threat circuitry. So when someone considers raising a concern, their brain is actually weighing up questions like, will I look difficult? Will I be ignored? Is this going to come back on me? And if that culture has punished speaking up in the past, even subtly, the brain, it learns pretty fast. So silence becomes safer than honesty. And I often ask leaders to think back to the last time someone raised a concern with them. And I'm not talking about the big and the formal ones, but the small ones. Those little, by the way, comments, or the little things said quietly in passing or at an end of a meeting. And then I'll ask a slightly harder question and I'll say, well, what happened next? Did the conversation slow down or did it speed up? Did curiosity show up or was there an explanation given? Did the person feel like they'd been heard or they'd been handled? Because from a neurological point of view, the brain's recording that moment, not the policy, not the value statement you've got, but your reaction as a leader. If raising a concern leads to defensiveness, dismissal, or subtle irritation, the brain's already learning something very quickly. It's learning that next time, silence is safer. And leaders rarely see that decision actually being made because it happens really quietly and it happens very early on. And that's why so many post-incident investigations, you'll often see the phrase such as, well, others were aware of the issue. They didn't say anything because they didn't care. They said nothing because their brains had already decided that it wasn't safe enough to speak out. Psychological safety isn't about being nice, it's about removing social threat. And this is where, as leaders, we set the tone here, whether we mean to or not, because how we respond to bad news, how we react to challenge, whether curiosity is showing up before judgment, brains are watching us, always. Now, most risky decisions don't feel risky in a moment. They feel often justified, necessary, or obvious. And that's bias at work, confirmation bias, optimism bias, normalization of deviance. These aren't flaws, they're features of human cognition. The problem is that unless people are trained to recognize when bias is likely to show up, the brain never actually pauses long enough to re-engage the prefrontal cortex. Mindful decision-making here isn't about slowing everything down. It's just about building in enough pause to ask better questions. What am I assuming? What's different today? What could make this go wrong? All it takes is that moment of reflection. But we have to design it in, because the brain won't volunteer it under pressure. So if there's one idea to take away from this episode, it's this. Risk isn't just a technical problem. It's a neurological one. And safer organizations aren't built by demanding better behavior. They're built by leaders who design systems and environments and cultures that work with the brain and not against it. And when we understand how people actually think, not how policies assume they think, then safety stops being about compliance and it starts being about intelligence. Because the brain isn't the enemy, but it does need better leadership. So the question I'm going to leave you with is this. If people in your organization are making unsafe decisions, is it because they don't care or because the system, the environment, the signals around them, are they quietly teaching their brains that risk is acceptable?